Welcome to episode 121 of the Postmodern Polymath Podcast. Hope y'all are doing spectacular. Of course, nothing's going on in the world right now. Everything's just peachy keen. No problems. I don't even know what the fuck I'm going to talk about this week with my next guest. I guess we'll have to wing it. Uh, so he's been on the show before, and I've known him for a couple of years. He is an author, freelance journalist, father, coffee drinker. He's a communist. He's a raging communist scum. And he's also on the board of directors in Antifa. So if you will join me in welcoming Dan Arel. How's it going, Dan Arel?
Yeah, hey, Chris, how are you? I'm doing very well.
How's good? In case nobody can see or isn't watching live, Dan has changed a bit. He no longer has hair, and he's got a beard thing going on. So I kind of like he looks less suburban dad, more like hardcore, uh, kind of hardcore Antifa, which you have to be nowadays, I guess. Since you're
Yeah,
working
no,
there.
yeah, they sent out the, dress code and regulations, and it was a high and tight or shave your head, and I went for the shaved head.
Good jiggle, man. Good deal. So obviously, first thing is you have new. Well, it's not new. You actually got. I guess you republished it. Your book, Parenting Without God. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So it's a second edition. So we took the book and retooled it. I rewrote it kind of from start to finish. I went through each chapter and, changed how my views have progressed, how different things through my life had changed how I parent. But also, anyone who read the original, no, I wrote that in 2013. And in 2013, I was still, influenced by the books from Sam Harris or Richard Dawkins. And the foreword to the book was written by Peter Boghossian. And if you've seen anything over the last few years, they've all gone downhill
Yeah.
drastically. So, after a while, I had asked my original publisher to take the book off the market. I wasn't happy to promote it anymore. It wasn't something I could stand behind because I didn't stand behind a person who put his name on the front of the book, but also someone else involved and other people I wrote about. So they agreed. And as if you can hear screaming in the background of my house, that's parenting life. I've got two kids fighting with each other about video games right now. And so I was really excited to have a chance to go through the book again and reread it, which was like the first time I had read it in years, but to, kind of show how I've evolved, but also to remove things that were no longer relevant. When I wrote that book, marriage equality was not a thing yet. And that actually shocked me. I forgot that when I wrote it, marriage equality wasn't a thing. So I have a whole chapter about how to talk about, same-sex issues with your children. And then the whole time I'm reading it and I'm like, wow, like when I wrote this wasn't a nationwide thing. And so I had to rewrite that whole section. And so now here I am with a second edition of a book dealing with parenting without God.
So I see you're out there shilling, trying to get people's money for $15 for a signed copy. I'm thinking I didn't get a signed copy, so I'm a little upset about that, Dan.
Sorry about that. It's straight from the publisher.
Yeah, sure. Actually, I'm just kidding. I think it's a great idea that you're doing that. I think it's kind of funny. A lot of people don't. I don't even read hard copies of books anymore. Most of my stuff's ebooks, so it's kind of interesting if you're an ebook reader and you get a kind of the tactile, book itself with somebody signing it. I think that's kind of a neat change or whatever.
Yeah, it's weird because we don't sell a lot in print anymore. It's just things are a lot different. So trying to sell them is harder. People want the ebook. It's easier. I have hundreds. Sorry, I have one daughter So this is parenting right here. This is live parenting. But I'm a huge ebook reader. I have a bookshelf right here full of books, but they're mostly books that are sent to me, and I tend to read on my ebook because I go around. So signing them is even harder to do these days. But you know, it's an interesting medium. So I love that signed book. I love when someone sends me something and I have this copy of it, even if I never even open it and read it. And I read a book that I've purchased on ebook or gotten on ebook. It's yeah, buy it, please. Somebody buy. I have a small stack of books at my house. I had to move them recently.
please buy them.
Please clap.
So let's get on to the book. First of all, obviously, it's about parenting without God. Go figure. But why don't you kind of give us an overlay of overview of what kind of the main thrusts are in the book?
Sure. So, you know, I often start with why I even wrote it, which is when I had kids. I remember my grandmother said, "Well, are you going to baptize your child?" And I said, "No." And she said, "But what if you're wrong?" And I said, "Sure, okay, let's go with that. But what if I'm wrong about your religion? Like, do I need to go through every single like birthright sort of trend here to get my child safe in every religion? Like, there's countless religions that could be right." And so during this conversation, she's sending me various emails with questions. What are you going to do about X? What are you going to do about Y? And I started collecting them. And I'd originally started with a series of blog posts. And I thought, you know, I'll do a blog series on parenting without God and how I'll address these questions. But as I'm writing it, more and more kept coming up. And questions that she wasn't asking, but I started asking myself. I was raised a certain way. How am I going to address this issue? And I started thinking about each and every one of those. Like, what's going to happen when that day comes where my child says, "Hey, so-and-so asked me to go to church with them." What's that? Just a simple question of what's church? What's God? Kids ask these things because other kids believe it. And I had to really think about how I want to address that. What kind of child do I want to raise? What morals and kind of values am I going to instill? And am I going to go the same route my parents did and just say, this religion is true? Am I going to say, oh, this is all fake? Or do I want them to process this information, think for themselves? And do I want to tell them what to think, or do I want to teach them how to think? And as I wrote the book, I felt it was even changing on the fly. Like I mentioned earlier, marriage equality became an issue in the book. Death, sex, the meaning of life, education. And it really became a book about all these different aspects of parenting and how you can address them without telling you what to do. I sort of gave you here's what I'm doing. Here's how I was raised, but here's how I would change that. Or here's what people have taught me that I plan on using as my children age. And that's sort of how the book started to progress. And in the second edition, I even added about what's happening now in real life. Like, there's such a religious influence on white supremacy that was really left out of the original book. But I felt like it was important to bring it into the new one because it wasn't being talked about enough and children would have questions about it. But a lot of the racism I found that existed in my childhood through different family members was all very much rooted in their religious beliefs. And I wanted to sort of pick that apart and show how to explain this to kids. And that's kind of where the book wound up.
Okay, so what are some of your main... Obviously, there's chapters in the book. Some of your main bullet points as far as the things you cover in the book. If you were to pick like a couple, what would be the most important ones?
I think the most important one was one that I had started in the original, and then I feel like I kind of built upon a little bit later in the second edition was the how to talk about religion with your kids, because it's such an important topic, because it's such a widely held belief throughout the world. And so I felt like it was really important to talk about it respectfully so that your kids don't go to school and say what you believe is dumb, what you believe is silly and stupid. And my dad makes fun of it all the time.
Although that would be hilarious.
But that also might be the case at my house. But because I want them to respect other people and to respect other people's beliefs. Doesn't mean they have to believe them or agree with them when it comes to things like religion, but I want them to sort of understand it. So it became a talking about them honestly, not. So when I remember the first time I was asked what's God, well, my very first response immediately wanted to be to kind of mock the idea. But instead, I actually told them what I was told. Here's what people think God is. And I just laid it out. And to my own surprise, my son laughed and said that that sounded silly, because if you kind of spell it out, it does in a sense. And I said, "Oh, you think so?" And he said, "Yeah." And I just kind of left it at that. It's his idea. But I reminded him that he shouldn't make fun of his friends that do believe it, because I also know that his friends that do believe it because they're told to. And it's not fair to them to say, well, that's a stupid thing to believe, because they don't believe it because they're kids. They're in elementary school. Their thought process isn't there yet. Their parents and authoritative figures tell them that this is true, so they accept it. And it's walking that fine line of telling your kids that I don't want to say atheism is true. I don't like the way that sounds, but that there is no God versus there is, and that line they walk. And then I think as the book goes into the next sort of section, which is sex, death, and the meaning of life, a main takeaway from that for me is life is this one thing that you make it. Really instill in every aspect of it. We only get this one shot at it. And religion really sells that this is just like a trial period. And then the real thing starts after. And you have to behave a certain way for this glorious life after. And all the suffering that people go through doesn't matter, because in the end, if they behave properly, there's this wonderful world. And what I want my children to think of is that that's not the answer. That people suffering today, well, we should do everything we can to help them, because this is all we get. And so their suffering is for what? And how do we build a society and a world that wants to help everybody and build up something where people aren't starving, where children aren't dying of cancer or getting the treatment they need during that? How do we get to that sort of society when you have, and I think I even say it in the book, what religion is almost a death cult, because they're obsessed with death and what's after. And I want my children and other children to be obsessed with this life and what we can do now, and not to say this is all building up to something. It's not. It's building up to what can we do now to help people today. And that's probably the communist in me. Trying to make some world where everyone's equal and everyone has the food and the housing and the clothing and all this that they need. But that's an important aspect to my moral compass, is that we are helping everybody. And then from there, I talk about the political landscape of the U.S. mostly, because that's where the book is written and that's where my life is. But just navigating those politics, and how do we talk about the ever-changing world that we're living in. So, like I said, in the first edition, we talked about marriage equality, and the second, that's past, but we're still dealing with issues of people saying they shouldn't have those rights, and we're dealing with transgender rights, and I touch on things, our Black Lives Matter related to race in the criminal justice system, And I think a lot of people were shocked to find those things in a parenting book that's supposed to be anti-religion, but so much of that is rooted in religious history. And religion is often used as a way to excuse such bad behavior. And so I felt like it was important to kind of wrap that in, even if it didn't apply directly to what people thought the book would be. I couldn't write a parenting book that didn't mention raising kids that were aware of these things. And that's sort of how the book wraps up, is kind of bringing that cultural and political side of things outside of, okay, we've talked about religion, we've talked about how to talk about religion, we've talked about the harm it can do and how it affects the life we live. Here's the political side of it, and now go out and raise some kids to change the world.
First of all, that's never going to happen with me. Because I'm clipped now, so that's impossible. But it is interesting though, because if anybody follows you on any social media platform, you're generally pretty, I don't know what the word would be, confrontational maybe,
A bit,
you know, kind of take it to them. But the tone in this book, of course, is about parenting, and I think we kind of see another side of Dan, kind of a gentler, kinder. Not saying that it's not any less important, like you said, for the kind of the communist in you to make difference and change and all that. But I did like you talked about respecting other people's beliefs and shit like that. Which, yeah, I do believe that too. I mean, I make hay of it sometimes about people are stupid, but I do feel that in the end, I mean, you're never going to get rid of religion. I don't care what anybody says, and that may be some debate there between people. I don't know, but I think it's important to respect people as long as they keep it to themselves and kind of don't try to put it in the public sphere, which is what they do all too often.
Right, and that's a big part of it. And to me, that's I get careful when I say respect other people's beliefs, because that then becomes, well, don't be mean to this racist. You have to respect their beliefs. Like, there is a degree to what you're respecting. And when I talk about it in the case of religion, it really does have a lot to do with the bigotry that can come along with that. So I respect anybody's right to believe in God. I'm not going to say that that they can't believe in that. They have every right to. But like you just said, don't bring it into laws. If you think that same-sex marriage is wrong, I'm not going to make a law. I'm not going to advocate for a law that says you can't think that. But I won't let you advocate for a law that says because my religion believes this, you can't do this. I would love to try to change that person's mind so that they're more open to the people around them, but I'm not trying to change their mind. And the same, honestly, if someone is incredibly racist but keeps their mouth shut, I'm not going to know, and we're not going to have a confrontation. And in reality, they're at peace to believe whatever nonsense they want. It's when they start bringing that to the forefront, when they're marching in the streets chanting "Jews will not replace us," or countering Black Lives Matter, or things like that. That's when it becomes confrontational, and I no longer have to respect your belief because you're now imposing it onto me. And that's when we have to draw that line. But I worry, and a lot of it came from the first edition to the second edition, was things like Sam Harris and Peter Boghossian, who say that they're only criticizing a belief. But you're not criticizing a belief when you write a blog post that says we should racially profile people. You've gone beyond that. And I feared, and what I saw too much of it come true, was that they turned like Islam into a race. People, and I'm guilty of this as well. I've gone on about Islamophobia before.
Yeah.
Honestly, Islamophobia is a real thing. And it's not, and maybe it's the wrong word for it, because Islamophobia is the fear of the religion Islam. Islam isn't a race. Much more. If I put people to the test and talk about where I've said this Muslim, what do you picture? They don't picture a white guy. They start picturing a stereotypical. And so I was, you're imposing this, mindset on what it means to be Muslim. And then the racism just follows along with that when you say that they're bad people. When you say that the majority of them are jihadists who want to kill you, you create this racist caricature and you lose the, oh, I'm criticizing their belief, to I'm making them a them, and now they're an enemy.
Right. We saw that early on when he wrote, what book was it when he started doing the racial profiling stuff?
I mean, it was pretty early. It was, The End of Faith has a good deal of it.
But yeah, I remember that, the whole thing that got started up with that. And he, of course, he refuses to apologize when he's wrong, and because he never admits he's wrong, and he never has anybody on his fucking podcast who ever challenge him on anything. And when they do, he says they're arguing in bad faith, which means he doesn't like him because they actually challenge this.
Right. And the problem with, this doesn't need to be a Sam Harris podcast, but it happens with him and a lot, though, is that they pose their bad argument later as, well, we're just asking a question. So Harris loves to fall back on his philosophy. So, I took philosophy 30 years ago in a bachelor degree, so I'm an expert here. And he said, I'm not saying, he wrote that we should theoretically nuke Middle East countries preemptively because they don't want to kill us. When he got called out for that, he said, no. It was a philosophical question. I'm not saying we should. I'm saying we should have this philosophical, but that's tactical. That puts something in someone's mind. And the thing with Harris and Rubin and Dawkins, they're not dumb. They're smart people who know what they're doing, and they play a very good game. And they create this bigotry and hate, and they cloud the whole, well, okay, I thought we were talking about these beliefs that they have that we think they should change. And now it's a people should be nuked for it. And we've now gone from A to Z. And it's,
we could
go on for probably 3 days about everything they've done.
That's a whole nother podcast right there. God, I fucking hate Sam Harris now. Anyway, he was good as an atheist. He just should have stayed in that lane, and he should just shut the fuck up about other stuff.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. So if you wanted to, overall, as a general idea, what would you say would be a good summary of what you want people to learn from your book?
How to let their children think. How to let them make up their own mind. And instead of telling them everything that you believe or why, ask them more questions when they ask you questions. So, why, how'd the moon get there? Maybe start, instead of just explaining it, I sometimes like to pose that question. How do you think it got there? And the younger they are, they're going to come up with some wild story. And you can say, that's what makes you think that? And they'll start to think, that starts that process of, oh, well, I think, and they'll start to build a story around it. And then as you can explain, how scientists think the moon got there, you start to show them in that same way that they thought out their story, how scientists thought out theirs. And it gives them these tools to start to think of, oh, okay, well, how did this happen? What about this? My daughter this morning asked me, are aliens real? And she was so unsatisfied with my answer of, oh, probably.
Thanks, Dad.
And she was like, well, she said, I needed her to do something. So I said, maybe. And I said, but if you go do this, chore, I'll tell you after. And so she went and did it and came back. And I said, the answer is, I don't know.
You asshole. Really?
Yeah,
you could at least come up with Something, ma'am. Come on. So,
And but then I tried, you know, and she's a bit younger, but you know, you can explain like, look, when we go outside with my telescope and we look at the planets, think of how much is out there, all the stars that we see at night. There's billions of things out there, billions of planets. We just don't know, but it's probably the case. And that's fascinating. But that just gives them those tools over the years to start to think about things more critically. And I want them to come up to their own conclusions about things and not just, this is true because my dad said it's true. Because if I just accepted everything as true because my dad said it was true, I'd be wrong about so many more things.
Dad says your religion's bullshit, Nancy. But I do like the idea of kind of the Socratic method with, I guess you could say, with kids, kind of just ask them questions and get them to answer those questions.
Right. And then, you know, you never want to let them walk away with the wrong answer. So if you don't know, it's also a great time to find out together. I get asked questions all the time I don't know the answer to. And it becomes, well, let's go online and look that up. Yeah. And we find a YouTube video or something I can read to them or I can tell them about it. You know, I usually try to find the best right-wing YouTuber I can to explain.
I was gonna say, man. Watch.
Yeah, no. I like Ben Shapiro explaining race to my children.
He's
Prager University is a great place to go for your political theory.
Yeah, I mean. So it's the idea of like critical thinking, asking questions. Of course, if you tell your kids to think something, they don't have much, doesn't require much imagination, right? So if
exactly,
if you give them something already, they don't have anywhere to go from there. They're just, and kids are all about imagination. And if you carry that on to later life, that's what you get. You get a bunch of unimaginative, Trumpers, basically. They don't have anything else because that's what they're programmed. They're programmed that way to not ask questions.
Right. And if you say, I've always said, never be embarrassed to say, I don't know, because just think of the number of things we don't know. But if you then say, I don't know, and then drop it, they also lose that drive to go find out. And so I like that, like, I don't know, let's figure that out. And then you go find out together. Especially if it's really quick. If it only takes you 10, 15 minutes to learn something new, they then realize that it's not that big of a deal to not know something and then go learn it because it doesn't take that long. Yes. You don't have to become an expert in planets to just learn about Jupiter. You can just find some base knowledge really quick. And that drives them to be like, if they don't know something, rather than give up, they're just going to go look it up because it only takes a few minutes.
They have such great tools nowadays. You can literally find it's amazing if you think about it. How much information is literally at your fingertips, right?
Yeah. Yeah, when I was a kid, we didn't have Google or the internet to run to. It was like, why does this thing exist? And I go look at a 20-year-old copy of an encyclopedia that was you're sick because of ghosts.
My grandparents had those they used to, salesmen used to come by and sell encyclopedias and shit back in the 80s.
Yeah. I remember them coming to my house and my dad buying them.
Yeah, my grandparents had like those world encyclopedias, some cheap.
Oh, yeah.
The stuff in there was just, okay, thanks for that. You had to go to the library if you wanted to find anything out.
Mm-hmm.
So, but there's no excuse to be ignorant. Of course, it's a tool, and like any other tool, it can be misused. Just like we said, the YouTube videos by such luminaries as Ben Shapiro talking about race theory or critical race theory, or guys on a feminist panel.
Well, the problem, the internet comes with its own problems, which is I can find anything to substantiate my argument. So if I tell you something is true, I can find something online to tell me that I'm right. And it just means that some other jackass out there agrees with me and wrote something about it. So there are downsides to the same tool. Like it's, I don't know if it's still the case, but you used to be able to research something about dinosaurs on Google. And if you typed it in, it was a creationist theory that was the first one to show up.
Oh, that's fucked.
And that's right. But so the tool can be misused. So there is an aspect of teaching people how to use the tools. You can't just say Google it. Like this, you also, as they get older, you've got to put that process of where are you reading this? This goes the same for news today. If I'm looking up news, how many times do you see like a news story come across on your Facebook or Twitter, and you're like, that source is quite dubious. Like,
That's a kind way of putting it.
covidnews.info.
Generally, if you don't recognize the website and it's
right,
some weird ass fucking crazy shit you've never heard of, I'd encourage anybody to go find that media bias chart. No, it's not. It's not infallible, but it is a good guide, I think, to generally what major sources are leaning. I feel like it's pretty fair. So if you want to kind of get an idea, if you're going to come to me and tell me AFP, which I got this other day, which is Agence France Presse or whatever the fuck, the French news agency, and somebody wanted to come at me and tell me it was bullshit, I'm like, okay, bye now.
Right, and that has a lot to do with it. When there's a big difference between getting an AFP or a Associated Press link to a Breitbart link, and Breitbart readers will fight with you for days over it. But they're drastically different publications. One's a blog that passes itself off as news, and one's a world-renowned, respected news organization that has won awards for its research, and differentiating that. But also, that's just part of going back to what we were originally talking about. Is those are part of the tools you have to teach your kids, is how to use that tool. You can't just hand them a computer and say, look it up. You've got to teach them how to use it, and with your kids, monitor the hell out of it. But there just has to be it's a tool that can be used for good and bad, but that's a whole part of teaching.
Yeah, don't fuck it up, Arel. Don't fuck it up. I don't have any kids, so I gotta fucking lean on you to, I'm gonna live through you vicariously.
Yeah, I'll do my best.
So everybody get his book. Where can they buy the book?
Right now I will tell you this. Buy it from PM Press direct. So pmpress.org. Find the book, and then so the book's Parenting Without God. Use the promo code PWG, because I had asked them about a week ago to give me a promo code to help push the book, because it's a 40% off promo code. But the reason is that they're struggling as a publisher. They're a small independent publisher, and Amazon's not buying books right now because they're focused on COVID related things, and bookstores haven't been open for a while, so they're not buying books like they were. And there's been a small independent publishers like PM Press and AK Press and Pitchstone, who used to do Parenting Without God. These book publishers, they're struggling. This is a hard time for them, and we need them to survive this. And so when I talked to my publisher recently and I said, look, like, how can I help? They said, get people to buy books, and from us direct saves them so much overhead. And I said, sure. And I said, can I offer them something? And they actually gave me a really huge 40% off, which I'll tell you up front, takes a huge knock off me, because I get a percentage of book sales, but the sale amount, so that's knocking 40% off. I don't care about that right now. I want to save publishers like them. It's a big deal. So go to pmpress.org and buy that, and buy tons of other books and merch from them. They're awesome. They're definitely one of the best people I've ever worked with.
And of course, send me that information, message of it to me so I can put it
in the
show notes. But this is not the end, because I wanted to switch gears a little bit. There's a little something going on right now. It's just minor things like protests going on all over the motherfucking country. About a gentleman who was murdered, and then of course it has moved forward. There's a lot of things to unpack here, I guess. to say the least. But why don't you kind of give
And
your
who better to talk about it than two white guys?
Yeah, right. But let's just, I mean, let's not, we obviously can't get too deep into it because we're here all fucking night. But what is your overall thoughts on what's going on right now with all the protests and the BLM stuff? And we'll start there.
Oh man, so I have a lot of thoughts on this, but honestly, this is a time right now for, well, especially folks like you and me. Like, you know, I just joked that this is something two white guys are talking about, but this is actually something two white guys should be talking about, because racism is our fault. And I don't necessarily just mean in the you and me. I mean in the white people created racism in this country. It's a problem that we push. You and me benefit from it, whether or not we want to. And we have to be talking about it to each other, to our friends, our family, to anyone that will listen, because it's up to us to solve it. And if people are saying, I don't understand why they're in the streets, why they're rioting, it's also up to us to talk about that, because the onus isn't on Black people in this country to continuously defend themselves and explain themselves and teach us about racism.
Right.
Like, we have that responsibility. And so a lot of my thinking right now is about the education of it, talking to whoever we can. And a lot of that recently has stemmed around the discussion around the use of violence or riots, or what that looks like, and why it's being used when people are trying to so easily dismiss the movement because of it. I often find that, you know, a lot of people are like, look, I'm all for it, but now that they're in the streets rioting, it's too much for me. And I just say bullshit. It's not up to us to tell, you know, Black men, women, Black people in general, how to fight for their lives. They've tried everything to tell us that they're being killed. And we lashed out at them when they took a knee. And they held protests after Eric Garner was killed, and cops wore I Can Breathe shirts to counter protest them. At what point do we just say, well, if you just ask nicer?
Yeah.
Like, they can't ask nicer. They've asked in every way, shape, and form. And this goes back to, you know, Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and the Black Panthers, and the history of them asking to not be murdered by police, or to not be, you know, victims of systemic racism in this country. How else are they supposed to ask? And for them to, and I said this I took part in this meeting about what was happening. And, you know, I work in the labor movement, and we had this big meeting about what's happening. And people kept bringing that up. Like, we can't support a movement that's doing this. And I said, if it takes up burning down 100 fucking Targets, 100 Walmarts to end racism in this country, then burn them the fuck down.
Oh, fuck. Yeah. Oh, fuck.
Like, if that's what it takes for these people to fucking listen. Because I will admit now, I benefit from white privilege. I benefit from being white. I can't stop that unless, as a society, we do way more. And I have to be willing to give up something to get something. And I'm willing to give up white privilege if we can get to that goal. But people have to first admit white privilege exists, which we're having a hard time getting people to admit, because so many people still say, I grew up poor. I grew up in a trailer park, and I didn't get to go to college. I didn't get these things. And I repeatedly have to say, white privilege doesn't mean you can't have a hard, shitty life. White privilege means that your hard, shitty life is because of the color of your skin. And I feel like we're still talking in circles there. And if we're still talking in circles there, we are miles and miles away from talking about what events in someone's life could drive them to burning down a Target.
I'm glad you started off this whole segment with we need to talk about what we need to do as white people. And you're absolutely right. I'm glad you started that out because that's exactly where we need to be. You're right. And as a unique perspective, living in the South, which is a joy, a utopian joy, let me tell you, I don't even, the whole idea of privilege, they're not going to listen. Okay. At some point, I mean, they haven't listened to black people since ever. We haven't listened to black people ever down here, especially. Fuck, we couldn't even get Reconstruction. We couldn't even stay in a couple of black people being in Congress or having some land and shit, you know. So they're never going to fucking give it up. So we're just going to have to fucking take it, is what it comes down to.
You have to take it, but also, and this comes fresh to my mind only because I just recently watched the documentary Black Panther's Vanguard of the Revolution, and they play so many clips from Fred Hampton, who talks so much about the class unity in the poor South and Black Americans, and how the Black Panthers worked a lot with Southern like worker movements that were suffering from a lot of the same social disparity on the economic stage, and they found such a unity there that they worked together to kind of overcome those. And to them, it wasn't about race; it was about where they were on the class scale. And I think there's a lot to be said in the South, especially, to why they are where they are, because the Democrats, to a degree, years and years ago, gave up on the South. They left. And when the Democrats left, so did labor movements. It was harder to unionize in the South.
Yeah.
What they did is they created this working class that felt abandoned. And what stems from that is people come in and take advantage of that and say, look, this is being taken from you by immigrants. This is being taken from you by this other group. And they start othering people. And they say, you're a hardworking white American in the South, and you've been abandoned here. And they're just taking from you. And they foster this culture of hate. And that just breeds, because then you have children and you pass on this legacy because they've been left there. And there is a big missing discussion about class in this, that I think we can really sort of bring these people, like you said, that aren't going to look at white privilege because their lives have not been easy. And so it's hard for them to understand white privilege doesn't mean that you have a good life. I understand that. It's very, you can resonate with that. People are suffering, they're starving, they're dying, and they're living on poverty. What the connection they're not making is that it's not because of the color of their skin. But I believe we can get them there. But I think the connection is class.
You know, and I'm glad you mentioned that. And you're hitting it. You're doing well, Dan. I guess that's why they call you the big brain. That's why they put you on the board of directors over there in Antifa. Right. Because I had forgotten about the class aspect. Of course, anytime there's been several times in U.S. history where the black lower class and the white lower class have tried to band together to try to, go against the ruling class. And of course, the ruling class always doesn't want that, obviously. So they want to try to divide and conquer. Indentured servants and slaves at one point had a common enemy, obviously the ruling class. After Reconstruction, there was poor white farmers, sharecroppers, and black sharecroppers. And we keep seeing this, but we also keep seeing, and of course, goes back to capitalist society in general. Of course, want to kind of keep down the working class so they can keep getting money and keep furthering wealth disparity. So yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, and I guess some people are it's easier for some people to be, I guess, I don't have much patience, and so I admire people who actually try to get in there and try to make those connections to people. And there are people like that, like you're a little better at it than, and Lyman's a little better at that. And I know a couple other people that are kind of able to try to bridge the gap and try to get people to understand where they're at and how they got there and who their real enemy is. And it's not, this black guy or this Hispanic gentleman over here. It's the guy at the top trying to take all your fucking money, basically.
Yeah, and the hardest part about overcoming that is that, and you're right, you mentioned capitalism, is that number one, capitalism created that competition where we think everyone's trying to take from us. And so we're always trying to one up and get above somebody else. But we have a hard time getting people to look to the top and point. That's the guy up there doing that, because we've also, as a country, spent so long selling the American dream and that you can have that if you work hard enough. And what we see are people working themselves until they die, thinking they're just that one step away from that new life. And what they don't realize is that that life they've created up there is so exclusive. You're either born into it or the very, very few that somehow fall into it. So and that's the story they harp on, is that, look, this person was born in the deep South and they didn't have a college education, but look what they built, and now they're a billionaire. And they use that one story over and over to sell you that life isn't bad. You just have to work for it. We make movies like The Blind Side and these other movies where they sell this idea that no, like, look, black people can have all of this fame and fortune, but they have to work harder for it. They just work hard, just like these white Americans, and they leave out the systemic racism that held them back, or the fact that they happened to get out, but these, millions of others weren't able to. And they leave out the fact that the government, creates ghettos for a reason, and that, Reagan's law and order policy put drugs in certain neighborhoods, and that COINTELPRO exists or existed. And and so we create this dream that you just have to work hard and you can have the fame and fortune, but no one ever stops to say, well, then why is it only 1% of the nation has this? Is the other 99% all lazy? And all these hard workers never quite stop and think, wait, I'm working my ass off and I'm not even close. And it's because they always make you feel like you're right there. And I think it's wrongly accredited to John Steinbeck, but there's someone always said the reason socialism will never work in America is because everyone thinks they're just temporarily displaced millionaires.
Embarrassed, yeah, millionaires.
Yeah.
I was just about to say that. Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's like we're like the alt one. I mean, we're not even fucking fully capitalist. That's what's so fucked up about it. We're capitalist, when it comes to, the wealthy, that we're socialists, but the rest of us fucking, we got to pay all the taxes and all that shit. They don't have to pay anything or whatever, They get corporate subsidies are fucking insanity to me. As much money as they get, that's just, especially petroleum companies, that's just obscene to me. But of course, that's capitalism too. So
Right.
We're seeing this going on right now, and I feel like a lot of it's a backlash, of course. And this is another topic I wanted to briefly get into, against policing in America. Now, a gentleman we both had on, Alex Vitale, I don't know if I guess it's pronounced that way, but he wrote the book Into Policing, and this motherfucker has blown up. He is everywhere now. And I had him, and you had him before he was big deal. See, we were on the ground
good luck
floor.
booking him now.
So let's kind of talk about that briefly. And one of the things I kind of wanted to center on was this whole idea that if we just use the right phraseology, somehow magically people are going to jump on board with the idea of defunding the police or abolishing the police or whatever. What do you think?
I prefer to just say abolish the police. I don't like so I think Alex's book is fantastic. I think his methodology is well done, because I think throughout his book he puts together that idea that you are in his mind abolishing the police one step at a time. So you're removing their necessity to deal with mental health issues. Then you're removing them from schools. Then you're removing them from here. And as you're doing that and replacing them with, community-based programs, social service things, suddenly you don't need the police. I've heard him in some talks get a little bit more, abolish the police, but he really is trying to sell this idea that we're going to, replace it, but the language pushes people away. The problem with that is what we're seeing now with defund the police. So defund the police is the same idea, really. You're going to take money from the police and put it towards a mental health service that is going to be called instead of the police if someone's having a mental health crisis. They're going to show up and they're not going to shoot the person. They're going to help them through the crisis situation and then get them the help they need. Then you take that money from a different thing the cops are doing and you keep moving it until the cops aren't doing their jobs anymore. They've been replaced. What happens, though, is that message is unclear, because that becomes people saying, yes, I am fully on board with cops not coming to mental health crisis issues anymore. But they say we still need them for school shootings, in which they're absolutely useless every time. But they continuously say, yes, I'm for reducing their budget, defunding parts of what they do. And then that's when you start hearing, because they're overworked. They do too much. They're asked to do things they shouldn't be doing. And that message becomes this whole 8 can't wait thing that we saw blow up during all of this, which is the, get rid of the chokehold, get rid of mental health. But all you end up doing is redirecting funds, but leaving the police intact. And New York City got rid of the chokehold, but they still killed Eric Garner with it. There's no chokehold used in the death of George Floyd. They kneeled on his neck. That wasn't a police chokehold. And they've removed. It's been co-opted by liberals and Democrats as this, let's reduce their budget. Let's reassign parts of their duties, when the message all along was supposed to be defund the police, and it was abolish them. We're taking their money and putting it somewhere else so that they no longer exist. And while I know that a lot of people are going to hear abolish the police and tune out, sorry, I haven't got fucking time. Our goal is to abolish them. Let's get there.
Yeah.
Let's not tiptoe around it. Let's not, we've got to go from point A to point Z. We don't have time in between to say, well, look, along the way, we'll defund them slowly so that they kill less black people. And then eventually they'll stop altogether. They don't want to wait for that.
Yeah,
Would you?
It
doesn't work.
That's the same shit they've been saying since the civil rights movement.
Well, exactly.
Just wait, it'll happen.
Yep. Vote. Biden will fix it.
Yeah, you said it.
But so yeah, I think I understand Alex Vitale's argument that you're not going to get people on board as easily, but I also don't think he's getting people on board, because his book is still called The End of Policing, and the people that aren't going to want to abolish them aren't going to want to do anything that has to do with ending them either. No matter what terminology you use, they're all about back the blue, Blue Lives Matter. We're going to have to get them there a different way. And I think what we're seeing right now, it might be the first step, which is we're seeing communities reject them. We're seeing schools kick them out. And I don't like that it's going to take this long, but that's the process. But right now, if our message is abolishment and we can show that it's doable, then we can create a template for doing it other places. And I think that's going to be our way forward right now. And it's not working within this whole idea of, oh, let's slowly take away things from them. No, let's remove them. They do not belong in our schools.
No.
Alex talks about it at great length in his book. There's no need for cops in schools, especially armed cops, who really just end up arresting more black kids than they do white kids, because that's the statistic everywhere, is that cops arrest more black people than white people. And they're threatening in school. Imagine walking around school. I mean, I went to school before Columbine, so armed cops in school weren't as popular a thing where I grew up. That doesn't mean it wasn't the same in other cities, but I can't imagine what it would have been like to walk down the hall and see an armed staff member walking around, or an armed person in uniform. I would feel like I'm under constant watch and surveillance. And now couple that with being a Black American who always feels like that outside of school. Now you feel like that in school. Like it just creates this toxic environment. And it's like there's just this boot right there waiting to step on you. And so, yeah, I love Alex's book. I still recommend it constantly. I don't agree that we shouldn't be calling this Abolish the Police. I'm very on board with like the 8 to Abolition, which was the answer to 8 Can't Wait, which was 8 steps to abolishing the police. It's a much more direct, goal-oriented action, because if you continuously set goals that sell your goal short, you'll never reach your goal.
So I'm glad you said it in the terminology of steps, because there are people out there who are being disingenuous about, well, if we could just, and this is one of my biggest issues with, well, how can you say we need police for certain things? And can't we just, do it this way? And you're not selling your movement correctly and all this shit. And there are people out there trying to do that. And I'm glad you mentioned the steps. I think that if you give people a kind of a blueprint, a good blueprint like you just offered, and then they still are, hemming and hawing, then that means you just don't give a fuck anyway. You don't give a fuck about abolishing police. I wish people would just be honest about it, right? Mm-hmm. So there are people who just don't give a fuck about, they love the police because they're white middle class fuck ups or whatever, or maybe they're not fuck ups.Maybe they're genuinely scared that privilege is a thing and they don't want to lose it. And let's be honest. I mean, that's human nature. A lot of time, I don't think a lot of people are malicious about it necessarily. They're just not educated, right? But I do believe grifters are taking advantage of that fear to kind of sell this idea that abolishing the police is somehow going to turn us into some wild anarchic state. With fuck you, because you don't know what anarchy actually is. Okay.
Yep. I had, and this oddly ties back to the book discussion, but I had a discussion on an airplane not that long ago with a gentleman I was flying with, who I couldn't resist once he sat down next to me and couldn't wait to tell me that he believed in Jesus. And he had no idea who I was. He just sat.
Get these guys.
He sat next to me, shook my hand, and I was like, this is a weird flight already. Who does that? You're in the middle seat. And he didn't take him long. He was like, oh, are you flying? We talked real quick. And it didn't take him long to jump into the, well, because of my religious beliefs, I'm a Jesus follower. And then he picked up his book, and I was like, I'm going to leave it at that. And then I couldn't. So we ended up having an 8-hour flight, which we discussed religion the entire time. But he brought up a very similar argument that you just said. He said, if we get rid of this law and order, we're going to fall into this anarchist state and everyone's going to take advantage of each other. And I said, but I believe people are inherently good. I said, I think that capitalist societies have created competition that makes us evil to each other. I was like, but if you go back to Marx's idea of primitive communism, societies worked together. And, there were conflicts and there were battles, but they tend to be worked out because people generally just wanted to live off the land, have what they needed, and move on. And I said, well, you believe this guy. I said, you believe God created everybody. I said, you believe he created everyone to be good at heart. These are the people. And he said, no. He does not believe people are naturally good people. He said that he believed that that's the struggle we go through to become good to get to heaven. And I think that became a big eye opener for me, in a sense, in my thinking about what it means to abolish the police and create this just, good society, is that we have a lot of education to do around mutual aid and how we care for each other. And to me, it's one big overarching package of to abolish the police is one thing, but we also have to change society as a whole. And I don't know who my neighbors are anymore. There used to be a time when I was a kid, I knew every neighbor there was. My parents knew everybody on our block, and the block functioned as a entity. That doesn't exist in so many places anymore. And if we had something like that, we'd care more about the community and the people in our community. And we'd start looking at things from a much different perspective rather than how's this affect me and how's this affect us.
Okay, James. No, but you're right. I agree. We don't know each other. I mean, it's scary though. I mean, I waffle on this idea that humans are inherently good. I'm just a cynic by nature. I don't know if that's necessarily true. I mean, it may be, it may not be. I guess it depends. And of course, it's all of one thing with the abolition of the police, refunding social services, vital infrastructure like transportation, making sure people have all the things they need to have it, like at least a base level of life, like not dying of poverty or hunger or anything like that. Then yeah, people are like less likely to commit crime if they actually have the stuff covered, and they feel like they're heard and understood and they're helped out. Then yeah, that's all of a part with the whole thing with defunding the police or whatever. So
right. I mean, imagine a society where you never had to worry about heat or clothing or food or housing. Number one, that right there takes away so many of the driving factors that people take to keep themselves out of poverty, robbery, but I mean, at the same time, in a different discussion, I'm going to really skip over this, and you're going to have to allow me to. But like making drugs, legal, and all these steps that you take to decriminalize society and decriminalize just survival, and when you do those, you start to remove those gaps. People don't need to steal from somebody else if they have what they need, because they're not stealing to be awful. They're stealing to live. They're stealing to survive. That's where so much of these, nonviolent crimes come from. And then a lot of the violent crimes you start to see become from the competition and so we got to start removing these barriers and creating a different way of thinking. And I mean, God, we're going to go down a huge rabbit hole, but that's getting rid of a for-profit prison system and a school-to-prison pipeline and all these things that continuously churn out profitable criminals for the system. And all these things combined create a different society that doesn't need police. And like you said, if we knew each other and felt more and heard, like if your community was in need and you felt like you could speak up, you can go to a city council meeting now and you're one of, in a city like San Diego, you're one of thousands of people with an opinion. And for my day job in labor, I've sat in on dozens and dozens of city council and board of supervisors meetings. And I've watched people in tears talking about how they're losing everything. They're losing their home. They're losing their healthcare, and they need the city to do something. And I look up, and the head of the city council is doing this. Hasn't made eye contact once, is writing a note or looking at their thing. I've watched them get up and leave the room while someone's giving testimony. That doesn't make someone feel heard in their community. That doesn't make them give a shit about their community. That makes them feel like the people that are supposed to be in charge don't care about them. Why should they care about it? And so what we're doing now just doesn't work. And if we're going to get to a place that we can start talking abolishing the police and we have a lot of work to do.
Well, this is a good good start down that path.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm encouraged a little bit cautiously, especially what Minneapolis doing. We'll see. That's a pretty big city. We'll see what happens there. I don't want to keep you any longer, Dan. I know you got children, and Antifa takes up all your time. I know you got the next board meeting coming up soon. I'm anxious to see how Antifa, what it does next. See the small towns. Y'all need to
I'm not going. I haven't got my Soros check in a while, so I'm not attending any meetings until he pays.
Sweet Soros. All right, Dan. Well, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me on.
It's been good to see you again. I'm telling you, man, the look's doing it for you. You need to push that look, man. It's good. It's good stuff. You need to get you a good Che Guevara beret going thing.
Oh, that could be a good look. Yeah, I should try that out.
I think you should do that. So, and of course, my advice is always taken and welcomed, I'm sure. Thanks again, Dan, for coming on. I know you got shit going on, so it's been a pleasure to talk to you. And again, make sure you go buy the book. I'll put the links up, and I'll even put the links up again for Alex's book because it's a good starting place. There are other books as well you should probably check out, and articles, etc., but that's a good starting place. Anyway, all right, Dan, well, take it easy.
Thank you. You too.
And y'all, until next time, y'all take it easy now, okay?